By the second half of the 19th century, African American artists were being formally trained. That would be particular to the North. Of these artists, one of the most important is Henry Tanner. And particularly, he's important for PAFA because he actually did some of his training at PAFA. He studied with Thomas Eakins before leaving to study and work abroad in Paris, where he's going to become the first African American artist to become an international success. The image that I have on the screen right now is a portrait of Tanner that was done by Thomas Eakins. And it is, I think, worth looking at because it reminds us that Eakins passes to Tanner his own interest in mystical lighting, spiritual lighting, revealing lighting, and the moment that we could describe as introspective. The face that we're looking at right here, painted by Eakins, in fact, I hope you recall when we look at the painting that Tanner does of his own mother. Okay, now Thomas Eakins himself studied in Europe, and while he was in Europe, one of the main sources of inspiration for him was actually Rembrandt. Okay, we're looking at Three Heads by Rembrandt now. Rembrandt is famous for his introspection, the moment when the figure draws within and evaluates and thinks, and also for the spiritual light, which helps to identify the main focus of the painting, usually the face of the sitter. These are three heads, including the self-portrait of Rembrandt, detail of in the lower left. Okay, another Rembrandt, you can find this one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer, and I want you to see the spiritual light that almost glows from the face of Aristotle in a contemplative moment against a darkened background. These are elements that will be picked up by Eakins and passed to Tanner, and we're going to see it especially in the portrait of Tanner's mother. Okay. Tanner, after he returns in particular, is going to embrace biblical subjects, which he is going to depict in a pretty dramatic manner using light, mystical lighting, and mystical coloring. His father was a Methodist Episcopal minister, and I have to assume that's where Tanner gets the strength of his own personal faith, and it's going to be instilled into his pictures that seem to acquire kind of timelessness, stillness, remoteness appropriate to religious subjects. The one at the upper left, which probably a lot of you already know because it's located in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts collection. This is a depiction of Nicodemus, and it was done on Tanner's second trip to Israel, to the Holy Land, basically. He was supported by the Wanamakers because after observing Tanner's work, they felt that it was appropriate to send Tanner to get firsthand experience so that he could better paint, not just as a painter, but better paint his religious subjects. And that would be true because what he did when he was in the Holy Land, Tanner, was to use local subjects as sitters in order to improve the authenticity of his paintings. Okay, Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and he's going to be the guy located to the left in the composition, who is going to come, a Jew, who's going to come, a liberal Jew, who's going to come secretly to study with Jesus. And this is one of those encounters between the two men as Jesus is passing his teaching to Nicodemus. This painting was shown at the Academy in 1899. It won a prize, and it was purchased by the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, so it is now in our collection. The one lower right is the artist's mother. You have to go to another museum to see this. It's in the Philadelphia Museum of Fine Arts. and it is one of their best tanners in that collection, I believe. It is a painting he did as a thank you and an homage to his mother after selling a painting to the French government. And remember that Tanner leaves the United States, he goes to France to work, to study, and he discovers that it's a much more fertile ground for an artist, an African-American artist, because there was less prejudice in France, in Paris particularly, than there was in the United States. After selling his first painting to the French government, he is very excited to create a picture honoring his mother, who made it possible for him to mature as an artist and as a person. This is his mom, Sarah. She was one of 11 children born into slavery. Their mother, and that would be Tanner's grandmother, put them all on the Underground Railroad and sent them north. I mean, can you imagine this? Because the mother never knew how their lives turned out. What a sacrifice to make. Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society found the kids and located them in homes. And Sarah grew up in Pittsburgh, becoming a well-educated young lady, turning into a school teacher, and ultimately marrying a minister, and training her children at home to appreciate education, literature, and also the arts. She's characterized here in a thoughtful, caring, contemplative, I think, and very gentle manner, but there's also the suggestion that she was indeed a strong mother. I think everybody looking at this now recognizes that it was based upon Whistler's arrangement in Gray and Black, #1, which we more lovingly refer to as Whistler's Mother, Portrait of Whistler's Mother. When Whistler did that picture, it was in fact an arrangement, a compositional study. Tanner is referencing it, but this is much more than a compositional study. This is actually a study filled with love, and a study that's fundamentally a thank you message to his mother. This is Tanner's banjo lesson, and this is an iconic Tanner. You're going to find this depicted in more books than you're going to find any other Tanner image. And I think it's in part because it references African heritage and the continuation of tradition. What it depicts, and it's called the banjo lesson, is the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. And in this case, it's the grandfather to the grandson. All of this takes place in a room filled with spiritual, mystical lighting and almost magical coloration in the back. And Tanner was gifted at using color in a very magical, mystical, mysterious, and I should say spiritual manner. By doing so, he elevates a genre subject, and this is a genre subject. A genre subject represents ordinary people doing ordinary things, but this takes on an almost religious quality. In this very poor, very rustic interior, the grandpa is passing on to his grandson how to play the banjo. And banjos are specific references to African instruments and to African music. They were early forms that were made by slaves, especially appearing in the Caribbean. They're associated with slave music, with folk music, and they become an instrument that is significant to slave culture. And in this case, to a kind of enlightenment and awareness of the child's past, as this knowledge, this tradition is being passed to the young boy. Grandpa is helping to support the instrument, but the kid is actually the one who is doing it or playing it. The banjo itself is going to derive from gourd instruments that were used in Africa and in the West Indies, and the banjo will become a kind of focal point for slave music in the 18th and in the 19th centuries. So it becomes a painting about the passage of traditions and the remembrance of history and of the past. I just wanted to show you this. Tanner is the first African American whose work will be acquired by the White House. And this is a piece under the Clinton administration that was acquired in 1996. It is Sand Dunes, a painting that he did near Atlantic City in the 1880s. It is not as powerful or strong in terms of making a social comment or historical comment as the iconic images that I've shown you, but it also at the same time I think conveys Tanner's subtle abilities at handling color. I have another African American artist who is also important in the 19th and also in the 20th centuries. She is Meadowvoe Warwick Fuller. I think for brevity we're going to refer to her as Fuller. She was a poet, a painter, and a sculptor. She was multi-talented. She was associated largely and remains so with African themes and African American themes, and with the concerns of the African American community. She's ours. She was born in Philadelphia, and originates from a very successful middle-class black family. She was one of only a few African American kids who were selected to attend a progressive art school in Philadelphia. We're talking about the lower grades now in high school. One of her works came out of this training in 1893 and was exhibited in the Chicago World Expo. As a result of that, she gets a scholarship to go to the school that will turn into what we know today as the University of the Arts. Point being, her skills were recognized very early, and she was officially trained with academic training. After graduation, she is going to travel to Paris. She's going to find a little difficult time there, but fortunately Tanner is already there and he's able to help her. So there is an African American community, essentially, expats who are established in Paris. She's going to study in Paris until 1902, 1903. She's going to return here. But while she is in Paris, she's going to be, the word I've read is protege. You could say also a student of Rodin. And by working with Rodin, she's going to be able to develop her ability to convey deep emotion. And that, I think, shows up in this, which is the talking skull, and also perhaps human suffering. She's considered to be one of the most significant African American sculptors, but I think I'd rather context her as one of the most important early African American women artists in general. Some folks consider her associated with the Harlem Renaissance, which we're going to be talking about next. Some folks call her a precursor to the Harlem Renaissance. I think she shares the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance, but does not necessarily participate in it directly by living and working in Harlem. I'll leave it to you to decide if she belongs in that category or not. She is going to return to Philly around 1903 and exhibit at PAFA in a series of different shows, 1906, 1908, 1920. And in these shows, she's going to have the opportunity to document African American life and the experience of African Americans in this country. Okay, the work that we're looking at right now, and it does include a photograph of Fuller, is referred to as Talking Skull, and it was done in 1937. It is a piece that in some ways makes it clear, the skull obviously belonging to someone who is dead, makes it clear that maybe there's even a universal desire sometimes to communicate those who have passed away, or a need to do so. This need for communication or connection with our ancestors and with our past and with our history, I think is universal. But this is also a piece that is specifically African American in its approach. I can't tell you exactly what Fuller intended. What I can tell you is there are a number of readings of this work, and I think you need to pick the one that works for you. The first reading is that this may indeed depict an African folktale about a talking skull. According to this folktale, a young boy, and we're seeing that here, encounters the skull as he's out in the bush, and the skull begins to speak to him. What the skull says is this, quote, "Tongue brought me here, and if you are not careful, tongue will bring you here too." Okay, in other words, talking is what killed the person whose skull we are looking at. And he's warning the finder of his skull not to do too much talking either. Well, okay, this is a young boy. What's the young boy going to do? He's going to be very excited. He's going to run back to his village, and he's going to tell the chief and everyone else that I've just found this talking skull. The village is going to become afraid. It's going to disrupt the village. Everybody's going to go with the boy back to find the skull. And of course, the skull is not going to speak. Because it's believed that the boy lied and disrupted life in the village and caused fear, the village decides that the boy must be beheaded. So the boy, in fact, is killed. Just after that, the skull will speak again. Okay, this essentially is a proverb that turns into a prophecy that is fulfilled. Okay, that's one reading for this. I'd probably like to read it in a slightly different way because I think this is a fairly powerful and emotionally conceived work. Let me see if I've got a bit better detail for us. Closer look, perhaps. I'd like to read it perhaps with an understanding that Fuller knew about animist ideas and ideas of connection between this world and the world of the spirits. And even taking it a notch further, that this represents a kind of longing for a connection with the distant ancestors and with our cultural ties in Africa. In other words, a longing for connection with our ancestral past. Okay. One last, this is Fuller's Ethiopia Awakening, which is one of her famous pieces. It's a small piece. Cast in bronze. It is an image of a woman, and I think it's notable she's a woman sculptor depicting a woman coming out of the wrappings of a mummy. This is influenced by Egyptian art, which also, of course, is from the continent of Africa. And she was able to experience Egyptian art by visiting the Louvre while she was in Paris, seeing it there. And also, after she marries, she moves to Boston. And Boston Museum of Fine Arts has the most wonderful Egyptian double Ka statue, which we think Fuller was aware of when she created this piece. One of the things that's striking about it is that the woman, as she's coming back to life, can be seen wearing a Nemes headdress. That is the headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh, almost exclusively reserved for pharaohs. So it is an indication of the prominence, the status, the significance of the woman as she's emerging out of her wrappings. It really is as if the woman here is claiming life again, claiming prominence again, and claiming consciousness and awareness in the world of America in the 20th century. In that sense, I think our sculptor indeed does connect with the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance.